Hi, and welcome back to the Why Eating Healthy is Not Enough Summit. My name is Linda Mechner, and I'm here today with my guest, Kim Knight, who is an emotional health detective and women's empowerment expert. Kim, do you want to share a little bit about you and how you came to do the work that you do?
Yes. So obviously, I think for most therapists, we come to do what we do because of our own journey to do it first for ourselves. And also, it's not that we've necessarily perfected ourselves, but we're, several steps or maybe many steps ahead of people who haven't yet stepped on that path of working with that particular issue. So I never planned to do this. My dream career was working in film production, and I got chronic fatigue, which I'd never heard of, but I was just getting more and more tired and was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. And little did I know that that would lead to 10 years, more or less, of not being able to work, being housebound, sometimes, being bedbound, and basically my whole life and career disrupted. And it led me on a deep journey to find out, well, what is causing this fatigue? Because nobody seemed to be able to tell me, even though I'd been to literally hundreds of therapists, and sometimes I'd make a bit of progress, but then nothing was really fundamentally changing. And the turning point came when I understood the power of emotional pain, which we hold inside unconsciously to create physical symptoms. And then that also allowed me to understand the depression, which I had been diagnosed with several years before the chronic fatigue. Got some nice little noises coming through there. It's always the way, isn't it?
Turn them off.
It's okay, technology. Yeah. So so I was diagnosed firstly with clinical depression in my 20s and ended up in hospital, and it was pretty intense. And it wasn't until I came to really understand emotions and the power of emotions that I understood how depression is the depressing unconsciously of emotions and emotional hurt. And so slowly I pieced all the pieces of the puzzle together, which took some time, and healed myself, and then started to help other people. So it wasn't planned, it just grew out of my own journey.
Isn't that so true for so many of us, is that wherever our wound is, that's the path we take, and that's where we help other people. And so there's something that you said the other day which really struck me, and that is about the death mother, which is a term I never really heard before. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the death mother, because now that I understand, I see it all around me, but it was a new term to me.
Yes, well, it's a relatively new term to me, actually, but when I heard it, it was like, wow, that is it. That says it in a nutshell. And what I observed through working with hundreds of women, because mainly I work with women, sometimes a few men, but mainly women, because I'm a woman and I believe that it's so much easier to work with somebody who you can relate to. I started to notice that there were common themes, underlying themes with people who have chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, irritable bowel syndrome, digestive issues, a whole range of physical symptoms. But it's like on the surface, you could have say 100 different symptoms. But if you go down beneath the surface, you come to a point, which is just one point. And that one point is self-worth issues, which then actually expands out into multiple issues, low self-esteem, low self-value, low self-belief, low self-confidence, a whole range of complexes. But also what became apparent was that all these people had what are called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, or what is called childhood emotional neglect, CEN. And that was the direct result of the parenting that they experienced. And we have to be careful not to judge or, you know, feel, you know, make it sound like I'm criticizing. I'm not. I'm just saying how it is, because we're always doing the best with what we can, and our parents or our caregivers were always doing their best. But unfortunately, if they were wounded, then they were unable to provide us with what we needed on an emotional level. And as far as the death mother is concerned, you know, the story of the death mother, or behind it, is from Greek mythology, and the story of Medusa, which is why it's also sometimes called the Medusa death mother complex, where Medusa was turned into a person with serpents on her instead of hair. And if anybody looked at her, they would be turned to stone. Right. Because her look would petrify them.
Right.
And when we have the death mother, and anybody, you know, who can relate to this is going to immediately relate to this, is that you will become paralyzed and shrink inwardly and shut down when you know, are given that look by your mother. And it also, you know, there's also a Medusa death father, but I won't go into that now. But yeah, it's the fact that we're shut down because we were maybe resented or not wanted or treated unkindly. There are many things that can happen from, you know, as far as treatment from the death mother, but it just totally shatters and destroys us at a very deep level within. And then it prevents us actually fulfilling our potential. And even though we can be very well educated, we can be very intelligent, we can even have quite a, you know, a good job and be quite successful in our job, but somewhere in our life we're going to self-sabotage because we're not going to allow ourselves to be our full potential, to be authentic, you know, fully authentic, to be fully independent, to be fully creative, to be fully productive. We're going to sabotage. Mm-hmm. And I can absolutely testify to this myself. If I look at my life, and I actually, you know, I'm still in what I would say the last throes of dealing with this death mother issue. It's not something that is changed overnight.
Right. And to be clear, because the ACEs is the adverse childhood events, but this is a particular kind of adverse childhood event. Like, it's a very particular kind of abuse or neglect, if you will. It's not being, you know, physically beaten or molested. It's something completely kind of different, but also in the same vein, right?
Yeah, well, being physically beaten may be part of it. Mm-hmm. But just to give you an idea, you know, to trigger some thoughts maybe in people, because one of the most important things is that people don't recognize what has happened. And in other words, they don't recognize that they've had a so-called, inverted commas, death mother. And the reason for that is that for a child, it's the worst possible thing to think or believe or recognize that the people that should love you the most and care for you the most haven't. Mm-hmm. It's literally terrifying, you know, and paralyzing again to recognize that. So some typical, you know, pointers are a mother who's unable to respond to the needs of the child, especially on an emotional level. If we felt we were unwanted or resented or even hated. And interestingly enough, the word Medusa literally translates as she who dominates. So often the death mother will be a very dominating personality, and we will feel very controlled and feel like we don't have any control ourselves. What else? We'll retreat in, oops, sorry, lost the picture for a second. That's my computer screen. Yeah, we will, I just had written some things here because I don't necessarily remember everything when we're talking. Yeah, so on the one hand, whilst we'll be very intelligent and capable, people will always be telling us we're really capable, but inside we feel we have the imposter syndrome. We find it difficult maybe to speak our truth. We will often find ourselves in relationships because, you know, like attracts like, and so we'll find ourselves in a relationship where we're unable to speak our truth, or people are walking all over us. We will have lack of clarity and purpose. Even, you know, a lot of people, it's like they know they want to do something with their life, but they just can't think what it is. There'll be a lack of vision, there'll be confusion, there'll be difficulty in relationships. So maybe may find it very difficult to get into a really healthy relationship, or there'll be an unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship, difficulty making friends, you know, true friends and true connection. There'll be scarcity because we experienced a scarcity of love, and that translates into scarcity, you know, in other parts of our life. And we will continually keep hoping that the mother, if she's still alive, is going to change, that one day she's going to love us. Right. And we'll keep seeking and seeking and seeking. And at some point, that means that we have not fully recognized, you know, the situation as it is. And at some point we have to fully face the situation and recognize, okay, this isn't going to change. This person is not going to change, and I'm not going to get what I've been craving my whole life, which is acceptance, validation, love, compassion, which are all what we call emotional needs, which need to be given to a child by the age of 7 in order for them to grow healthy self-esteem and self-belief and self-worth, etc.
Right. I imagine there's some inner dialogue, conscious or unconscious, that goes something like, if only I could be good enough, if only I were better, right?
Oh yeah, and that will play out in many, many ways. It will play out in our work. We'll never feel good enough in whatever we do in our work, even if we're excelling. Everything. It will play out in all areas of our life. I'm never good enough. And I remember, you know, often finding myself saying, it doesn't matter what I do or try to do with my mother, it's never good enough. I can never satisfy her needs and desires. And even if you're absolutely, you know, up at perfection, it will never be good enough. And here are another, just to read a few more. The death mother is distant, cold. She doesn't actually know you. It's like, you know, you keep wondering, why is it that she just doesn't get me, you know? She's not necessarily, you know, she's not interested in you. She often plays the victim, and that can be what I call the overt martyr or the covert martyr. So the overt martyr is, you know, very, very obvious, whereas the covert martyr is less obvious, but that it's still there, the victim consciousness. They have no heart, because it's all about heart. So that's why we have these phrases like cold-hearted or, you know, warm-hearted. It's all about heart. And what's happened is their heart has become petrified. In other words, turned to stone, because of whatever wounding they have had, which they're unwilling to face. And therefore they project all their pain out onto you and take it out onto you. They'll often be jealous. It's all about them. If you start having a conversation with them, they'll say, so what, they'll ask you a question, and then you'll start answering, and then they'll interrupt, or they'll just immediately turn it around and make it all about them. They're unappreciative, judgmental, opinionated, very negative. Cruelty is a very, you know, very common sign. Cruel and mean in their words, you know, really hitting to the core. Emotionally abusive. They kill hope, they kill initiative, they kill creativity, they drain energy. You know, so lots of signs.
So I wonder, as with many kinds of emotional trauma, are there particular ways that, or physical manifestations of a death mother, like there's certain kinds of abuse that are more, you know, like sexual trauma sometimes manifests as female troubles. Is there a way that, or some ways, common ways that this sort of manifests, like?
Well, as I said, like in 13 years of working with women with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, chronic, ongoing, incomprehensible symptoms of pain or fatigue.
So
when we drill down,
uh-huh.
it's because of what's happened in childhood, because I found in every single person I've ever worked with, the health issues that they're experiencing in their teenage years, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 80s, it all comes back to the first 7 years.
So interesting. I mean, if we could turn back time, that would be the ultimate medicine to just actually, but I guess it's not even about turning back time, because when you think about things differently, you can sort of give yourself what you needed then, and you get at least some of the benefit of it now, right? Would you say that?
Yeah, it's not that. What's interesting though is, it's easy on paper to say, okay, well, I'm going to give myself what I never got given, because that is ultimately what we have to do. Or one of the things that we have to do is that we have to learn to mother ourselves and be our own best mother. But it's actually not that easy, or easier said than done, because we're programmed in how we behave and how we think, and it's all unconscious and very, very deep patterning. And so when we try to make these changes at a conscious level, they don't work, because the unconscious is too strong and keeps tripping us up. So that's why it's a slow process. It's not something that changes. I find in general, it's not something that changes overnight. It's a long-term endeavor to do this healing.
Mm-hmm. How long would you say, and I know you probably said that, like, it's been 10 years that you've been on the path. Is that what you said?
No, I was sick for 10 years with chronic fatigue.
Okay.
But I've been working on myself, so to speak, for 30 years. I believe it's a lifetime endeavor. And I don't say that to be negative and to draw things out. It's just that this is the nature of the beast. And I also believe that there are much, much bigger and deeper reasons for why these things happen on a spiritual soul level. Right. And that is what helps to pull us through as well.
Yeah, I so agree. I have been on my healing path for at least 35 years, if not more. And I mean, it's a journey. It's a life path that we get on for whatever reason. I don't have a death mother. Thank goodness. That's not one of my problems or one of my challenges, but Lord knows I've had my own. And it's just a constant learning and tweaking and reprogramming. And I feel like it's a dance I've learned to do.
And I think it's one of the biggest traps we can fall into when we go on this healing journey, is thinking we're going to be fixed overnight, or maybe in a month, or maybe in 3 months. And it's not that we can't have significant progress in that time. And what I found is that physical symptoms can be quite quickly reduced. So when I work with people one-to-one, usually they're in a completely different place within 3 months, which is actually quite a short time considering the years they may have been experiencing those symptoms. Right. But changing our fundamental patterning inside and our beliefs, which are unconscious, and learning how to manage our emotional state and learning how to manage our stress, because one of the things that happens as well is that our body gets stuck in a stress response at a very early age because it doesn't feel safe to not be stressed. But that's all unconscious. And so there's this constant underlying foundation of stress response. Changing all those things takes time, because we have to learn so much about ourselves. We have to change things about, ourselves. We have to change how we do our life. And it takes time to change habits and to change these deeply ingrained patterns of consciousness.
Right. So are there certain therapies or strategies that you find particularly helpful or useful for people changing or shifting that deep level of consciousness?
Well, so many, there are so many natural therapies out there, and I've trained personally, professionally in about 20. And I tend to use, bring out of the toolbox whatever is needed. But having said that, I think I've gone beyond just using those particular strategies or techniques, and I just do my own thing now. So, you know, I think what's important is that people are drawn to what feels right for them. You know, when you go searching, you know, seek and you shall find. As soon as we go searching, we're just going to see a flyer, or we're going to come across a website and we won't even remember how we got there, but we got there. And we're just drawn to a particular therapy, or we have a conversation with somebody and they mention something. You know, having said that, I'm pretty confident that what I do is, I think, what amongst the best, because I tried so many different therapies on my own journey and found that certain things didn't work and certain things did work, although again, it is very unique to each person. But one of the programs that I've trained in and teach is about changing our patterns of consciousness. And actually, in order to do that program, we first have to do a prior training, which is working on cultivating our heart consciousness. So we have to cultivate what are called the 5 essential qualities of the heart. And the first quality is trust, because when we grow up in, you know, toxic, difficult environments, we lose trust. And we lose trust in 3 ways. We lose trust, we stop trusting. Initially, it's other people, because the people that we should be able to trust, we don't feel safe with, because they, you know, abuse in some way or don't support us in the right way. And so we lose trust in other people, which then also sort of simultaneously leads us to lose trust in ourselves. We start doubting ourselves, and we stop listening to our intuition, our inner tutor, which is our heart and also our gut. And then we go up into the head, and we get stuck in our head, and the head tries to solve all our problems, but it's not designed to do that, because we have 3 brains: the head, the heart, and the gut. And so we're not using our full capacity to be able to tune into ourselves and do what's right for us. And so we stop trusting ourselves, and we start believing what the head says. And the head has what we call a lot of rationalizations, and a rationalization is a rational lie. So, you know, for example, if somebody is being treated unfairly by somebody else, and the heart knows it doesn't feel good, and the gut says this doesn't feel right, the head will come in and say, oh yes, but, and come up with an excuse for why that person behaves that way. And, you know, in regards to the death mother, you know, we'll continually say, oh, well, yes, she was doing her best. You know, there'll be some excuse as to why we allow that, you know, we justify the behavior, until we finally stand and face, and, you know, the truth of, you know what, I was not treated okay, and I was not given what I needed, and I have a huge amount of pain and also a huge amount of rage. It's not just anger, it's rage, which is deeply, deeply buried. And for women, one of the most difficult emotions to face and manage and even recognize is the anger spectrum. So we can have slightly annoyed to rage, and in the middle we'll have annoyed and frustrated. It's a spectrum like every emotion. And often when I'm working with people, because I teach emotional, you know, intelligence and emotional alchemy, and I'm always asking people, okay, you know, what emotion did you feel when this happened? And they might say hurt or sad, but they'll often miss the frustration or the annoyance or the anger, because we've so programmed ourselves to not even recognize our frustration and anger.
I think you hit on something really important, because I think at some level we stop even recognizing feelings because they're so common, they're so pervasive. Like because we can't handle them, they get pushed down, and then it just becomes white noise.
And that's exactly why. And that's why people get sick, because the emotions then transform the dis-ease, which is the emotions, and the stress combined turn into symptoms. They turn into disease. And we don't even know that those emotions are there. And that was exactly how it was for me. Even though I'd done a lot of therapies and quite a bit of counseling before I had this sort of light bulb moment of recognizing the extraordinary amount of emotional pain that had been hiding inside of me. And then once I'd understood that, and I started learning techniques to identify emotions and self-clear emotions, because we've got to be able to do this ourselves. We can't keep relying on other people, and actually it's even impossible. There's a certain amount that other people can help you with, but at some point one has to start doing the work for oneself. It's just how it is if we're moving along this path of evolution, as a human being. And so I started learning these specific techniques for clearing emotions and getting in touch with emotions and acknowledging emotions and not being afraid of emotions, and basically becoming very emotionally literate. And what amazed me was really understanding this correlation between, if I have a physical symptom, it means I've missed an emotion. I therefore have to identify what the emotion is and deal with that, which may mean dealing with the emotion inside of me dealing with the situation that has created the emotion in the first place. And I was amazed at how so often I could have, debilitating fatigue and symptoms and just not see initially any emotion tied to it. But then always, if I dug deeper and persisted, I always discovered an emotion that had been hiding.
Wow, so interesting. So I have a question for you, and that is, sometimes when we think about working out our emotional challenges with people, sometimes it's helpful to have the person still living. And maybe you could say something about that. How is it for people who still have a living narcissistic mother as opposed to one that's passed away? And how do people navigate? I know there's not all one way, but just navigate an ongoing relationship as opposed to a relationship that never can get addressed.
Well, I have a particular program called Emotional Empowerment, which teaches a technique called Authentic Me, and it teaches exactly how to manage these people. And there are 3 key things that we have to do. We have to create clear boundaries, because often we haven't been doing that, and that has been causing us to build up a whole range of frustration and upset and hurt and whatever inside of us, which have then been turning into symptoms. So we have to learn how to create clear boundaries, and in order to do that, we have to learn how to communicate honestly and authentically. We have to learn to speak our truth, and there is a certain way that we can do that. It's almost like a step-by-step template, and within that we have to learn how to communicate our feelings honestly, and do it in a way that we keep ourselves safe, but we also take our power back. And the third thing is we have to learn to make ourselves a priority without feeling guilty, because often there's huge guilt with putting ourselves first, speaking our truth, speaking our mind, saying what we need or want, etc. So we must do these things, and the results of doing this are nothing short of miraculous in terms of how we feel about ourselves and how our health improves. So interestingly enough, just doing that can radically reduce symptoms and even disappear completely. Everybody is different. What I found is that every single person is going to have a different recipe, if you like, for what they're going to need. Although having said that, there are certain things that every single person in this situation is going to have to do. And they're not just going to have to be doing it with the mother. They're going to have to do it with every person in their life, because we behave, similarly to everybody. So if it's not the mother that is creating an issue, it'll be the boss at work, or a work colleague, or a partner, or a friend, or even children. Because we teach people how to treat us. So, I remember once I had a client, very intelligent lady, very well, educated. She was a brain coach, actually, and she had chronic fatigue. and could not work out why. And in the first session that I do with clients, it's a very, very deep dive into the complete picture of the root cause of the problem, and it's just done in one go. And for the first time ever, she was able to connect the dots between her mother, who was, you know, a death mother, so to speak, and why she had fatigue and, you know, suppressing of all the emotions, in particular, a lot of suppression of frustration. And so, for example, one of the things that her mother would do, you know, her mother was still alive, was that she would ring her, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 times a day, something ridiculous, right? But she didn't know that she could say no to that. So that's one of the things we have to learn as well, is to say no. And so she'd been tolerating this, but of course all the emotions inside had just been, you know, suppressed, creating this. And by the way, you know, chronic fatigue is in large part from this emotional perspective, actually in total part from an emotional perspective. Chronic fatigue is not a lack of energy, it's a blocking of energy, and specifically a blocking of emotional energy. So she'd been blocking and holding in all this frustration, you know, mainly frustration, and that had led to the fatigue. So, you know, I coached her how to do those 3 things that I shared before. And so she decided that she needed to put some boundaries in place and to say no and to express how she was honestly feeling, etc., etc. And lo and behold, you know, symptoms immediately started to lift. It's amazing how, you know, when we do what is right for us, which means we're living authentically and in integrity, that is when our body creates health and happiness. When we go against, you know, these laws of health and these laws of life and what is right for us, then we create illness.
Yeah, I think you are so right on. And I know that you have a wonderful free gift for our listeners, which they can access right here below this video. And I just want to thank you so much for being here with me today and shedding light on this. It is such an important topic, and I think one that has not really seen enough of the light of day. Not enough people are recognizing it or talking about it, even when it is absolutely 100% their reality. The concept of a death mother is not in their consciousness, and the fact that they are carrying that load with them is not part of their consciousness. So thank you so much for highlighting this and bringing it out to the world.
Well, I just want to say I didn't come up with that term, just to be really, really clear. But when I heard about it, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's a really good way to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening in. And hopefully this has been helpful to you. And I will see you soon with another speaker.
Thank you.